So, dear friends and colleagues, welcome to all of you. Welcome to our GLOBSEC Brussels online debate. Today on the issue of Ukraine 2024, can freedom still win? Which is part of a project, actually a larger series of events on transatlantic security cooperation in Eastern Europe, which is generously supported by the US mission to the European Union in Brussels. And it's my honor and pleasure to moderate this debate. You know, in one of my recent tweets about this, I called this the mother of all debates because, frankly speaking, in Europe's strategic community, it is admittedly the overriding question at the moment. Will Ukraine be able to hold the line, or will Russia be able to pull off military breakthroughs this year, which might actually turn the tide of the war, with all the fatal consequences this would have for the following points. Of course, the future of Ukraine, security in Europe as a whole, the fate of the entire West, and therefore for the cause of freedom on a global scale. So sure enough, there are all kinds of sub-debates to this, ranging from the current military situation to Europe's ability to help, to assist, and to deliver more weapons and ammo, possibly even to make up for what is beginning to sorely lack from the US side, which will bring us to the US domestic political scene and its impact on Ukraine in the next 2 years. And as if that wasn't enough, I think we should, if we manage, we should also not forget about the effectiveness of the Russia sanctions, which is closely tied to the debate about the global South, which in turn brings up the correlation between Russia's aggression in Ukraine and the Hamas terror attack of October 7th and the whole war in the Middle East right now. So let me introduce our kickoff speakers. And I can say at this point that Nico Lange is joining us probably a little bit late. He got stuck on a plane, he says. But the two speakers, kickoff speakers that we have right here is Elina Beketova, who is an in-residence fellow with the Democracy Fellowship Program at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C. CEPA is arguably one of the think tanks most focused on Central Europe, relations between the US and Central Europe, so far in place, of course, joined by GLOBSEC recently. Anyway, we'll come to that in a minute. Elina writes about Ukraine's temporarily occupied territories, the impact of Russian forces in those captured lands, as well as on US policy towards Russia and Ukraine. She is a journalist, editor, and TV anchor for news stations, and she has done this in Kharkiv and in Kiev in the past. Now, the other kickoff speaker present here right now, Alena Kudzko, Vice President for Policy and Programming at GLOBSEC. She focuses on transatlantic relations, defense, intersections of technology, society, and security. And she's also executive director, and that comes back to the Washington question, executive director of GLOBSEC's US Foundation, where she is now setting up an ambitious program for GLOBSEC in the United States. And I may also say that before joining GLOBSEC, she worked at various NGOs and academic institutions in Belarus, Estonia, and Hungary. She's Belarusian herself. So at the moment, it's a German, Belarusian, and a Ukrainian based in Washington. And the German is based in Brussels, and the Belarusian is based in Bratislava. How about that for an international set of speakers? Okay, without further ado, I would now like to start with the kickoff questions. And please, we agree to stick to 5 minutes with your answers. Actually, I think I'll have to replace Nico here for the moment because he still hasn't turned up. Nico was supposed to report a little bit about the current military situation. So I'll do my best to improvise here. What we essentially see since the recognition that the counteroffensive of last year hasn't brought the desired results. And since the massive missile attacks of Christmas and New Year's in Ukraine, what we see is, I think, an increasingly difficult situation on the ground with some spectacular and actually also militarily relevant successes of Ukrainian strikes against occupying troops, infrastructure, and actually even infrastructure in Russia itself. The one military success Ukraine can obviously show, which has concrete political and economic results, consequences, is of course the freeing of the sea lanes in the Black Sea. You know, Ukraine, without a navy of its own right now, having pushed back Russia's navy to such a degree that Ukrainian exports of food and raw materials can actually happen via sea again, which is extremely important. At the same time, we have, and this is going to be one of our main topics today, we have an increasing lack of ammunition and spare parts, especially artillery ammunition, where the balance used to be at the best times of last summer, sometimes 1-to-1 in some places between Russian stocks in artillery ammunition and Ukrainian stocks. Now in very many places, this is 10-to-1, and Russia has gone back on the offensive. And this is not confined to the east, to the eastern part of the theater, as it was still 2 months ago, but it's actually now across the entire front line, or many parts of the front line. So also including the south, where territorial gains made by Ukraine in the counteroffensive last summer are now in peril. I would conclude here and certainly welcome Elina and Alena to contribute if you find particular points worth mentioning. But I want to conclude my presentation here just with the insight that precisely in this situation where actually, especially ammunition, but also better air defenses and better long-range missile artillery should be delivered by Western countries, especially in this situation, the assistance seems to be dwindling. And this concerns, for example, promised ammunition support from the European Union countries, as well as the entire support, military and financial, from the US, which is at the moment stuck in Congress. So, I mean, that is the situation. Elina, Alena, would you like to add something to this, or highlight a factor which is particularly important to this military political situation? Elina, you go first.
Well, thank you so much, Roland, for actually having this type of conversation, and thank you so much for inviting me. I completely agree with you about the lack of ammunition and the lack of anti-missile systems that Ukraine definitely needs to actually change the course of the war. But this is something that we need to do together with our allies. I just wanted to, kind of share a few examples from Ukraine, because this part, right, like the military political part, this is something that is dependent on politics on other countries. But I just wanted to share a few examples from, like people's lives, simple people who live in Ukraine, what they think about it, how they react, what their moods currently. And I just need to tell you that today marks 750 5th day of Russia's full-scale invasion, and Ukrainians continue to fight. This is an existential battle for everyone, as you know, and probably all of you have friends in Ukraine, and you definitely know the moods of Ukrainians. If you, it's true that the end of last year and the beginning of this year was very tough for every Ukrainian due to the Russia's missile and drone strikes. But an example from the military, I have a friend of mine, he's 38 years old, and he commanded one of the companies of the 47th Mechanized Brigade during the counteroffensive in Zaporizhia. He was injured and lost his leg, but still he is thinking about how to contribute after he is recovered, more or less in summer. So even those people who were on the battlefield, who were injured, who lost their leg, they still think how to contribute and how to do something about Ukraine. We have this, I feel that it's like the general mood of people. There are no people that are not connected with the war or kind of helping to end the war and helping Ukraine to actually gain success. So, even this person who I told you about, he said that Ukraine needs to change the narrative that everything is fine with us, we will win soon, to everything is quite difficult, but we have to fight. This is our current reality. So another example, my friend, she just gave birth to her first kid 4 months ago. And she is working on British projects on reconstruction of Ukraine. And this is also something very interesting because last year, at the end of year, the beginning of this year, it was very tough in Ukraine in terms of all the shellings and attacks. But she said that she wanted to proceed working. So she shared her feelings that she's really tired, but also very angry. Every time Kyiv is attacked by the Russian forces, she has to be with her newborn baby in the basement or the parking lot. It makes her even angrier. So, but however, in the morning, she works even more intensively. So I feel that this is what distinguishes Ukrainians from Russians who just came to invade another country. We have a high morale to fight, because if we don't fight, Bucha will be in every house. So that is why, regardless any political decisions, Ukrainians are still eager to fight, and they are resilient and they are resistant. So this is just something that I wanted to add in terms of, we will have different aspects today in our conversation, but I do believe that Ukrainians can win and freedom can still win.
Great, thank you so much for this picture. I just want to ask one follow-up question. There was a pretty painful debate over the last couple of months in Ukrainian society and in the parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, about a new wave of recruitment. I kind of this added also to the allegations about tensions between the commander-in-chief Zaluzhny and President Zelensky. So can you just give us a 2-minute overview of the political debates concerning the war in Ukrainian politics right now?
You mean in terms of Ukrainians or the mobilization law?
Well, yeah, mainly about the mobilization, because, one of the arguments of the skeptics in the West is that Ukraine is at the end of its human resources, that Russia's superiority, not only in weapons, but also in population, will actually continue to tilt the playing field in favor of Russia's aggression. How is that seen by Ukrainians?
Well, it's just, I heard these arguments, but on the other hand, we have a lot of people in Ukraine who are still want to be drafted and who want to be conscripted. And as you know, in the middle of January, the government decided to withdraw the first draft law on mobilization and immediately prepare a new one, because a lot of parliamentarians were not ready to support many of the proposals. So there was the argument that the new version of the draft law on improving mobilization will appear around the 6th of February. also, I know that a lot of parliamentarians are working right now on different proposals and drafts. It's just the whole thing. I've checked. I checked yesterday. We had the point of view of Major General Viktor Nikoluk. He is the commander of the training department at Ground Forces Command. He said that Ukraine has the ability to train any number of personnel determined by the new law on mobilization, which may be adopted soon. He said that 500,000, 100,000, 200,000, it doesn't matter, whatever the law on mobilization will determine, they are ready. He said that they are constantly conducting relevant activities and holding meetings to clarify the actual capabilities of all training centers and the actual conditions of the instructor staff, because many of them are involved in combat missions. But he said that today they are ready to train any number of personnel, and that it's in terms of mobilization, you still have a lot of people who do want to go and serve in the army. And I just feel that the whole debate right now is kind of, we have a lot of people who have been mobilized, but they didn't have vacations since then. So a lot of people are kind of not happy because of that, because of course they do want to see their families. But on the other hand, we have some other people who want to join the ranks of the army. But it's just, I feel that they will come up with the decision. Parliamentarians will find this more or less balanced draft that will be approved, and then I feel that we still have people, and I don't agree with the narrative that Ukraine is running out of people, that we don't have this human resource.
Okay.
I completely agree that we do need to. I remember that in summer I had an interview with the Lieutenant General Tweety, and he explained me that the main changer of the war is the person, the human being, the soldier, and we have to do everything to give him or her as many weapons and something that could defend him, because this is the real game changer of the war. And if, of course, we need to protect more. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sorry.
I want to give the floor to Alena Kudzko right now. So you heard what Elina said about the mood and the discussion in Ukraine, and that actually the human factor is not only important, but it's also, it doesn't look as hopeless as it's painted by some in the West. But could you enlighten us a little bit more about the debates that are going on, especially inside the European Union at the moment, as concerns weapons, as concerns ammunition, but also as concerns this question of, should Ukraine be forced to negotiate? Does Russia even want to negotiate? So, I mean, there's a bunch of questions. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roland. Happy to be here. Before I switch to the debate in Europe, just one quick anecdote to follow up on the discussion on the human factor that reminds me a little bit of the Golda Meir famous quote. Apparently, the urban legend that she said it to Joe Biden when he was a senator, but in fact, she said it on many other occasions, is that, dear Senator, why are you so sad? Don't be sad. We Israelis have a secret weapon. We don't have anywhere to hide, and we don't have anywhere to run away to. This situation reflects very well what's going on in Ukraine. Ukrainians will have to fight, and they're fighting because it's an existential fight, and then simply don't have anywhere to run away to. A lot of people in Europe understand that. Some of them do not. So where does it leave it with the debate in Europe? Of course, as you pointed out, it's a pretty difficult moment, and there are several sets of arguments that are being highly debated in the European discourse, but also in the US and other countries. The first argument, it actually concerns the reality of the distribution of resources. There are a lot of people who would say that we have limited resources, and maybe giving them to Ukraine is not necessarily the most efficient and the most consequential way right now. This also concerns people who genuinely want Ukraine to win, but then they look at the electoral calendar in Europe, in their home countries, and start genuinely being afraid that providing help to Ukraine is not going to win them votes at home. They're afraid that a lot of political opponents, especially those who are on the political far right, are going to say that, look, we have populations who are concerned about the cost of life, inflation, energy, and whatnot, and we need to cater to them first. And in the end, we might end up having Europe of Viktor Orban's and Marine Le Pen's, and even Ukrainians don't want that. So there's definitely this debate about how to spend the resources and what's the timing of the spending. Of course, there is a huge debate about the weapons. A lot of people are going to say, yes, we understand Ukrainians need weapons, but A, we need some weapons for our own defenses, and B, of course, producing much more requires a lot of financial investments, which brings us back to the discussion where to get the money for all of it. But of course, there is also much more nefarious argument that is often being made in Europe, and that is that Russia cannot be defeated. The people who say that would say that, look, of course, Ukrainians pushed Russia back, but Russia is still holding on to significant territories. There is no signs that Russia is planning to give them back. If needed, Russia will mobilize more people. They don't care about people anyways, and they will do everything to destroy their economy, but they will churn out enough weapons to hold on to what they have. These arguments are not that fringe, actually. They've been voiced at various political levels, including by some people who effectively are in charge of countries, for example, Viktor Orban or Robert Fico. But the same logic is also part of this argument that because it's going to be very difficult to kick out Russia entirely of the Ukrainian territories, maybe it's time now to negotiate. And people would say that, okay, in a few more years, we're going to kill more people, more Ukrainians, spend much more resources, but going to end up exactly where we are right now. So let's save everybody a few years and just make Ukraine get a deal with Russia. Of course, there's a lot of flaws in all of these arguments. Primarily, and we learned that many times, that Russia doesn't have a will to negotiate, especially on conditions that in any ways will favor Ukrainians. And Russia doesn't really stick to agreements that it has made in the past. So kicking the can down the road and hoping that Russia is going to get better, nicer, kinder is not necessarily a very wise strategy on the side of Europeans, because the problems are only going to return in a big way a few years from now, when Russia will have time to replenish its economic potential, Russia will have time to regroup and potentially to achieve much more in Ukraine. But you can make the same argument, of course, on the economic and weapon sides. The counter argument would be that we do need to treat support for Ukraine as an insurance policy for Europe. Yes, it does cost money right now, but if you live in an earthquake zone, you do want to buy the insurance because you might end up losing everything in a few years from now.
Yeah, excellent points. Let me follow up with one idea, because as you said in the beginning of your statement, Alena, many in the West are saying that, okay, well, we don't have the industrial capacity yet to produce big numbers of new weapons for Ukraine. We have given more or less all that we could give, but the rest, what our forces currently have, the equipment they operate, we can't give it away precisely because Russia has become so dangerous. I mean, that's an argument often made by the German government, for example, at the moment. And here's this crazy sounding idea that on second look maybe is not that crazy at all. It is to say that, well, why don't we give part of the equipment currently used by active military forces in the West to Ukraine, of course, at the same time ramping up production, and thereby actually containing Russian aggression in a much more effective way, like using the weapons for the same purpose they would be used for in 5 or 10 years when Russia will be ready to attack NATO proper. So let's give them to the Ukrainians, have them used at the moment for precisely that purpose of containing Russian aggression. So why is this not happening?
Yeah, I actually don't think it's a crazy argument. I think it's the wisest move to do right now. And by the way, if Russia attacks European countries right now, whatever they have in stock is not going to be enough to properly defend European countries. So there is not much use of these weapons anyway. So indeed, it would be much wiser to give it to Ukraine right now and get Ukrainians to the job. In that, Europeans don't even have to fight and don't even have to die for defending what they have right now. Why is it not happening? Of course, there is always a sense of short-sightedness. For many people in Europe, it's still hard to imagine that Russia will actually attack them. And it's even harder to imagine that how they can live without having any defense forces. So I wouldn't attribute it to any particular rationality, but rather a little bit of an difficulty to convey to the European public who has not been in war for many, many decades and who is struggling seriously to imagine that this reality can actually happen to them.
Yes, excellent points. Maybe also one particular fear by people who are hesitant about delivering massively and the most modern equipment now, and that fear is the fear of escalation. You know, I mean, the first weeks of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, nearly 2 years ago, the first weeks were full of talk about World War III and escalation, you know, nuclear strike from one side, then triggering this, and suddenly the whole world goes up in radioactive dust. And under the surface, this fear of escalation has always been there. Also in this, for example, if you take the German government's arguments about this, you know, tanks starting in spring 2022, fighter planes, artillery, all kinds of weapon systems were always denied to Ukraine, at least initially, with the argument that this would provoke Russia into escalating the war. And maybe also directly attacking NATO, because NATO has become, or NATO countries have become parties to the conflict. So what do you make of this escalation argument? You know, how can it effectively be countered, actually?
I think you already destroyed the escalation argument when you said that there were worries about every single type of weapon before, and in the end we gave it to Ukraine and nothing happened. There were worries about what if Finland joins NATO, Finland joined NATO and what, and nothing. So my suggestion would be just to extrapolate this behavior to other types of weapons. Russia does not have the capacity now to escalate it, and is not entirely. If Russia were suicidal, it could annihilate itself a long time ago. So if it hasn't done it before, I don't think the situation will change if Ukraine gets a better types of weapons, as it did in the past.
Okay, great answer. Now, before I turn back to Elina Beketova, I would
Elina
like
wants to comment on escalation.
No, I just want to add a few words.
Wait. Yes, it's your turn in a second. I just want to say to our public watching, you shouldn't only listen and watch, you should also ask questions in the chat. That's what it's there for. I forgot probably to mention this in time, but please ask in the chat to hosts and panelists your questions, and we're going to pick them up and discuss them here. I mean, it's not like we're short of issues among the three of us, but I want some audience participation here. So please come up with questions or short comments. It's also fine. Now, while you're thinking about this, Elina Beketova, first of all, we would like to hear your comment on the escalation and deterrence question. But I would also like to come to the red, white, and blue elephant in the room, which is the political situation in the United States. And I'm talking about both sides of the aisle, not just the Republicans and Trump, but also the Democrats and the Biden administration. And how do you see the strategic debate about Russia's aggression and Ukraine's defense going in Washington? But first, please feel free to comment upon what Alena Kudzko just said on.
Thank you so much. Well, I completely agree with you about this fear of escalation. And I also can add that it's also the denial strategy, because sometimes you need some time to actually accept the new reality. I felt that even after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, there were some talks in Germany among ordinary people saying that probably it should be over very soon somehow, so people wouldn't believe and wouldn't see Russia for who it was. Imperialistic, absolutely imperialistic moods, and the desire to just eliminate another nation. And I felt that they needed, more or less some time to accept the new reality. And I feel the same was with other countries. So this strategy, as we see, doesn't simply work, because the fear of escalation, it's the strategy of appeasement of the aggressor. So we think that it won't, like, if we don't do anything, then the aggressor won't do anything too. But in our case, we understand if Ukraine ends to fight, then we won't have a nation. While if Russia will stop fighting, they will just withdraw their soldiers. So, and the war will be over. So that is why in these terms.
Sorry to interrupt, but we need to liven this up a little bit. Now, I'll give you a counter argument to what you just said. You say if Ukraine stops fighting, it's the end of Ukraine. If Russia stops fighting, it's the end of the war. Well, that is not the way it's presented by the Kremlin propagandists. They're saying this is a fight about the existence of Russia. This is a fight about the future of our nation. Because not only Ukrainians, but the whole West is trying to destroy Russia. And what we're actually doing is we're doing some kind of forward defense here. And if Russia loses this, it's going to be the end of Russia and the collapse of our country. How would you respond to these arguments?
I mean, we all understand what the Russian propaganda is doing and why they are doing it, because that's the mobilization on this, the whole world is against of us, let's unite together. And this is this absolutely horrible psychopathic attitude to people and explanation of everything what is going on. In this case, people have to believe that it's safe there, but it's not safe somewhere outside of Russia. This is what they're doing, and this is their strategy. We all understand that it's easy to combat it just by looking and analyzing the messages that they are giving, because the last statement of their Dmitry Medvedev on Telegram, he said that the existence of Ukraine is dangerous for its inhabitants. He said that he was talking not only about the current state and its authorities, but about absolutely any Ukraine. So he denies the existence of Ukraine as a state and Ukrainians as a nation. So this is very dangerous, and we understand that by uniting people there inside, they are just trying to mobilize them to basically be against of the whole world. But the other messaging says that Ukrainians simply don't have to exist. So that is why we have to be very, people who are Russia watchers, they definitely analyze all these messages and they see what they are doing, because they have like double messages for internal domestic audience and external audience. So, but I don't know whether I answered your question, Roland, or not.
Perfect. We're coming to the US in a second. I just want to say here, the chat was unfortunately switched off before, but it is switched on now, so you can ask questions. We have a first question. So before we get to the United States, I think we should maybe tackle this. So Michael is asking, what are your predictions for the upcoming Global Peace Summit in Switzerland, which was recently announced by President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and President of the Swiss Confederation, Viola Amherd? So who would like to take that question? Volunteers, please.
I can
Otherwise, I appoint you. I appoint you volunteer, Alena Kudzko.
I will quickly start. Of course, it's important that Ukraine keeps trying to mobilize the global support to make sure that there can be a fair and just peace in Ukraine, and it needs to continue with this effort. I do not expect this particular round to deliver any consequential outcomes. We've seen already several attempts, including by other countries, be it Turkey or Saudi Arabia. There hasn't been a breakthrough so far. I don't think there will be one in Switzerland. But also what for me is symptomatic is during his previous trip to Switzerland to the Davos Forum, Zelensky really tried to get a message, to get a meeting with the Chinese, and the meeting did not happen because the Chinese were not willing to grant the meeting, which probably indicates that Russia still is trying to mobilize its allies to make sure that any meaningful negotiations cannot be happening at this moment in time.
Yeah, great. Okay,
well,
we got to, sorry, one sentence. Go ahead, Elina. One sentence.
Yeah, just one sentence. I completely agree with Alena, but also just wanted to add that I feel that all this peace talks, they are really good in terms of that Ukraine has this place and venue where we can also talk about important for and crucial for Ukraine things, but I'm not really sure that it can actually shift the course of everything on the battlefield. It cannot shift anywhere Ukraine because there is Russia who actually doesn't want to do anything about that, who doesn't want to stop the war, you know. So that's the most important thing. But I feel that all the negotiations, of course, are good, especially if there are other countries involved. But at this point, I don't see that there will be any outcome.
Okay, right. Before we turn to the second question in the chat, I would like to now come to the US, because this is such a crucial debate. You know, I mean, for the past couple of weeks already, the beginning of this year in Europe was full of debates. What happens if Trump gets elected? What will happen to support for Ukraine? And, you know, if we look at the news from Congress in the last days, is that it seems like actually Trump is trying to get to actively prevent even the compromise agreement between Democrats and Republicans for supporting Ukraine. So the fear in Europe is there might not be any support for Ukraine from the United States from now till the elections, and if Trump wins, there won't be any after that either. Elina, Beketova, what is there to these?
That's a very complex question, Roland, but let's start with probably a supplemental bill. Unfortunately, I completely agree that at this point, the supplemental bill is kind of stuck. It's true, but there are people who I really trust and who tell that despite the delay, a further 60 billion of US aid to Ukraine will still be approved. And majorities of both Republicans and Democrats agree that helping Ukraine is in the US national interest. Republican Senate Mitchell McConnell, House Foreign Affairs Committee, other people, the House Speaker Mike Johnson has said that they all have said that they will support, like Mike Johnson actually said that he will support bringing this supplemental bill to floor vote. That will surely be positive. Unfortunately, we don't know when it will happen because we still have these contradictions and discussions. It's after the meeting with the president, Joe Biden, I think it was on January 18th, House Speaker Mike Johnson said that we understand that there are all these things that are very important, but the border issue is the top priority, the speaker said. So it's not the disagreement over Ukraine and like the aid to Ukraine, but over how to handle the wave of migrants, of illegal immigration across the US southern border. Because as you know, and there are like various estimations right now that in December, there were around 200,000 to 300,000 people who illegally crossed the border. And these are only those people who were processed, because many more are never caught or tracked. So that is why, it's we saw saw a lot of major crises, not only in the US border, but in such states as Texas and Arizona, and in other major cities with the illegal immigration. But I feel that this supplemental bill will be approved, but the question is, of course, when. It's a very complex and complicated question. I cannot reply it, but let's see and observe this situation. I hope that it's like, we are talking about, can freedom still win? And I believe that, yes, it can still win, because the Congress will find this decision. They will vote for this supplemental bill, and Ukraine will have it. But what happens if the Congress won't pass it, right? So the administration actually has other means of supporting Ukraine if the supplemental bill doesn't pass. So it can exercise authority to lend Ukraine funds for defense articles through the already approved Lend-Lease Act. Also, it has other opportunities to give aid to Ukraine, and also we probably, as you might heard about, frozen assets or frozen Russian assets. So it also can be a mechanism. So at this point, I see that there will be some movement, and just let's wait a little bit. But the question is, Roland, do you want me to reply on it right now? What will happen if Trump wins right now, or should we? Okay, so that's also another complex question, but I'm sure that Ukraine will work with any president that American people will vote for, and any administration, in terms of how the policy towards Ukraine might be changed. It's very hard to predict at this point. What we know so far, the former president Donald Trump said that, I think it was in July 2023, then during these debates, he said that he would secure peace in Ukraine within 24 hours. Then we heard the President Zelensky, who said, Donald Trump, please come over here to Ukraine and show us how. So at this point, everyone is interested in how to end the war within these 24 hours. Does it mean that let Putin keep the parts of Ukraine that Russians have captured? That would be ending the war on Putin's terms and giving him the territory he stole. Does the free world want it? Does the free world want to be weaker in this particular situation? I doubt it. I understand that messages during pre-presidential campaigns can often differ significantly from those during the actual presidency. So I believe in checks and balances within the American system, and it's in the United States national interest to deter authoritarian states which want to redraw maps by force. And it doesn't matter who the president is. I find it difficult to believe that Donald Trump will just will be remembered as a president who abandoned the country. He partially helped with freedom before, because as you remember, even the Minister Kuleba said about approval of sanctions on Nord Stream 2. He added that Trump was also the first to sell lethal weapons to Ukraine. And you probably saw the Boris Johnson op-ed in Daily Mail. He said that he cannot believe that Trump will ditch the Ukrainians. There is a quote, on the contrary, having worked out, as he surely has, that there is no deal to be done with Putin, I reckon there is a good chance that he will double down and finish what he started by giving them what they need to win. So there are like absolutely different statements right now and different points of view. What will happen at this point, we don't know. We cannot predict it. But having said that, I also encourage to think about Plan B. Regardless who will become the president of the United States, it's important to strengthen NATO and European security. But this is another topic. And I know that there are multiple reports, and I think that SIPA, like the end of the year, we have just published our new vision for the transatlantic alliance, the future of European security, the United States and the world order after Russia's war in Ukraine. And there are particular steps how to make this NATO European security better strengthened. So that's my points.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That leads again back to a very important European topic. which is like, does Europe have to take care of its security alone in future? So I think I would reserve that to the last 5 minutes of our debate, but we have a couple of questions in the chat. So there is one question from Istvan Vosh about the endurance of the Ukrainian people, but that you have answered in the very beginning. So I think we don't have to particularly focus on this. But Istvan also asked about the recent corruption scandal with the Ukrainian defense company procurement fraud. Can you, Elina Beketova, can you say a word about this?
I mean, the Ukraine defense company procurement fraud, as far as I know, there are investigations, and what I see right now, this is a very important thing, because in Ukraine, as you know, we have at least 5 anti-corruption agencies that work with the, corruption messages and corruption cases. So I feel that we have the system changed, and people won't tolerate it. This is the main thing, so that we understand it. People don't want to tolerate the corruption, and if you understand that there are a lot of people who unfortunately were killed or were injured, and right now there is zero tolerance to any type of corruptions, but we see that there are, after every time we see this statement, there is an investigation. Then it takes time to actually find the evidence, whether if this was true, then all the people who were involved, who were responsible for any type of frauds, they will be prosecuted, they will be in jail. And we have at least several examples that proved that Ukraine is combating this corruption at this point.
Okay, great.
Can I just very quickly, just because that's an important topic, and that's actually one of the arguments that is used in the West why we shouldn't support Ukraine, because the argument goes Ukraine is a corrupt country. Alena has partially already provided justification that actually there is a huge demand from the Ukrainian people to fight corruption. Ukraine has made a lot of progress in introducing institutions, but let's also remember that it takes a long time to change the system. We still have problems in many European countries where corruption scandals come up here and there pretty regularly, and it doesn't mean that the country is defunct by design. It just means that more work needs to be done. And even on the corruption element, if you look at different independent rankings that's done, be it by Transparency International or by others, Ukraine actually is ranked somewhere at the same level as Colombia, or even higher than Mexico. And at the same time, Colombia and Mexico are part of OECD, and nobody has any concerns about investing in this country. So I wouldn't use that as an argument against Ukraine, but yes, there should be also more pressure from Western donors to help Ukraine to change the system and make sure that its anti-corruption institutions are working.
Absolutely. Okay, 2 more points in the chat. First of all, there's a question by Michael Benamou from France, who has spent a lot of time in Ukraine recently, as I know. So, as a response to the argument that Russia will always be on the attack, he says, well, Russia's population and economy being on the decline, what could they possibly do after Ukraine from a military standpoint? What would be their next aggressive step? Elina Beketova, can you take that one?
Well, of course, but unfortunately, I don't see that Russia's population and economy being on the decline. Unfortunately, they are being on the military production of everything. And this is something that Europe and the United States has to actually do right now, but we are not at this point right now. But I just wanted to add that what is their next aggressive step? It can be anything, it can be Poland, it can be Baltic states, and probably you saw that Baltic states plan a common defense zone on Russia border as security concerns mount. Estonia will build hundreds of bunkers on eastern frontier to deter the Kremlin's possible aggression. So we see that there are particular steps that are being taken to deter the possible Russian aggression. And unfortunately, with the Russia, it's always like this. They are doing something and then they are testing whether there is enough of response. If there is not enough of response, they go further.
Okay, thanks. Let us move to another question by Pavlo, who says, actually he makes a comment. Shortage of personnel on the battlefield in Ukraine, but much depends on how the new mobilization effort under the new mobilization law will be handled by society. Well, we already actually came to this already. Graham is asking, what are the risks to Ukraine if and when world attention turns away from Russia-Ukraine war? So, for example, Middle Eastern war, Iran, China, Taiwan. Maybe Alena, Kudzko, could you take that?
In some ways, this is already happening, especially, of course, the media headlines are dominated by other crises, but also the discussions among the policymakers are exactly about that. How do we make the wise decisions about the distributions of the available resources that we have? And of course, part of this is how all these crises are connected with each other. It's in the interest of Europeans to make sure that we have the staying power on Ukraine. But of course, there's also a point that needs to be made that a lot of these crises are connected, and doing something on one and not doing on another one can have spillover effects. For example, if we don't solve Ukraine, it likely means that Russia will be emboldened to do more damage, maybe in cooperation with Iran in the Middle East. It actually has already been doing that and will have even more resources to do that. But it also has connections to the Indo-Pacific. The discussion much revolves, especially in the United States, whether Ukraine and Taiwan are a trade-off. My opinion is that it's not a trade-off. It actually, one is helping the other. If we make sure that we can show that Russia can back from Ukraine, and the third, it will also have deterrent effect also on those who might want to demonstrate aggressive policies in the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, great point. Now, Rui, yes?
If I may add a little bit on this new mobilization, because there was a question, and I feel that I just want to add one sentence about our mobilization campaign. I feel that once we see actually what will be in this draft law, we can tell you more about that. But at this point, I feel that speaking with some of the military, they say that we need to change this system of mobilization because, well, we do have some shortages. We do have some mobilized people who do want to have a vacation, but they still haven't had it. But I heard that sometimes it's just the quality and the system that, for instance, if a person has really nice skills during his civilian life that can be related to the wartime, he or she should definitely do it. For instance, I was explained on a very simple example that if a person is a is a good IT professional and he is sent somewhere to trenches, like a person would ask, make him a radio technician and he will fix everything there, because we definitely need a lot of radio technicians or technicians working with the drones. So there are a lot of civilian professions that actually can be amped inside of the military and inside of the mobilization campaign. So that is why I feel that in this point, the quality and the system should be changed. But from what I heard, we still can mobilize a lot of people.
Okay. And a direct follow-up question on this: will women have to join the army?
Well, we have a lot of women in the ranks of the army even right now, and they can join, and it's a voluntarily right now.
Okay, and here is another very, very important general strategic question, and I would like to finish with this. Rui asks, the policy debate in the West is now largely focused on the financial costs of backing Ukraine. Well, what do you think would be the financial, material, human, civilizational costs for the West if Russia managed to defeat Ukraine and was then to attack Europe, as it most certainly would? Alena, Kudzko.
It's indeed one of the difficulties with democracies is that much of the thinking is short-term because a lot of people are thinking in terms of political cycle. So there is much less discussion about the overall costs exactly in the ways it described. What happens if Russia wins? Simply because it requires much more effort and delivers much fewer of the tangible decisions and results right now. So absolutely right, this decision is not sufficiently happening at the European level. The cost, though, will be enormous. We did our part, and we did a short exercise in trying to calculate what it would mean for Central and Eastern European countries like Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Czech Republic, what it would mean if we stop supporting Ukraine right now. We called it, what are the costs of inaction? And the costs are enormous on all fronts, starting from the cost of how much the countries would need to invest in militaries if they really have to face aggressive Russia right now at its border. Then the cost to economy, which is caused by uncertainty, which would mean that there will be less investment, less vibrant economic development in the area. But it also goes into much harder to calculate, but still enormous cost of what it means in terms of disruption of the international trade, of what it means if Russia gets to interfere into trade issues, energy issues, blackmail countries on all fronts, what it means if Russia will be able to make deals with like-minded countries to change the rules of the game in economy, trade, and whatnot. So the costs are going to be enormous, and these conversations will need to be held much more actively in all European countries.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the most important points in the whole debate. Last question, this time from me to you, Alena Kudzko. How about Europe alone? And this doesn't only concern Ukraine, of course, but this whole question of, because of the United States electorate's unwillingness to get more globally involved, increasing isolationism, and maybe even Trump actually turning against any further security commitment by the United States, Europeans might have to take care of their security alone. What are the prospects here?
Politica recently did this famous article trying to see what exactly happens if this comes to reality. It's pretty chilling. The short answer is no, right now Europe will not be able to defend itself. And this is the sad reality that Europeans have to counter with. My recipe would be, we need to do everything we can to make sure that the best case scenario comes to fruition, which means we need to invest in our own defense. We need to work with the Americans across the aisle who have different perspectives, different ideas, but we need to make sure that we try to keep as many Americans with transatlantic orientation as possible. But yes, we do need to plan for the plan B, which means Europe has no other choice but invest much more seriously in its own defense, in its own defense production, and seriously war game exercises where Europe might indeed be under the attack.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, this was very, very rich in content. I'd love to continue this, but I think this is the point for the eight or nine takeaways of this debate, and I'll try to be selective and get the most important ones. First of all, as to the military situation, yes, it is critical for Ukraine, but Ukraine has enormous potentials. Ukraine is motivated. Ukrainians know that if they stop fighting, it's the end of their country. Second, the negotiation argument that now is the moment to push Ukraine towards negotiation is completely flawed on so many fronts. And two of the most important arguments here are, first of all, Putin does not want to negotiate at the moment. He still has the goal of occupying the whole of Ukraine or making the whole of Ukraine a de facto part of Russia. And second, whatever he commits to, he has shown multiple times that he will cheat on this. So that is actually not an option. The escalation argument, and this is my third point, we can see in how Russia has reacted, or actually it hasn't reacted, to increasing sophistication of weapon systems delivered by the West to Ukraine. We see that the escalation were empty threats, so that certainly more and better material should be delivered to Ukraine if we want Ukraine to actually prevail in this. Which brings me to the fourth point, or actually it's a sub point to this one. It is that if industrial production is not good enough at the moment to deliver more to Ukraine, and yet at the same time the stocks have been depleted in the West, well, then equipment currently being in active use in Western armed forces will have to deliver to Ukraine, because they are fulfilling what they are made for, which is to actually contain Russia. They're fulfilling that purpose much better in Ukraine today than in the depots or in the current use in armies in the West. Let me just bring up briefly the ways for the US to help Ukraine if Congress doesn't manage to move on this. There are numerous ways to circumvent this by the US government, the administration, but also by using Russian assets, for example, and thereby financing more assistance to Ukraine without actually the Republicans being able to block decision making. Corruption has to be fought, and in fact, Ukraine is on the forefront of this. The Ukrainian population wants to very actively fight corruption. It's a long-term process, however. Seventh point, the global South argument and the question of different theaters of conflict kind of being in trade-off situations against each other, that is precisely the wrong way of framing the whole question. It is not either security for Taiwan or for Ukraine. It is not either focusing on the Middle East or on security in Europe. It is actually one theater. It has to be framed as one global conflict where at the moment an alliance of authoritarian regimes, Russia and China in the front, but then some others following behind, trying to attack the West on many different fronts. And it would be playing into their hands if we started to separate neatly, putting in boxes the different conflicts and claiming that we can solve one and ignore the other. Eighth point, the mother of all tasks in this debate about helping Ukraine is in the West is actually to paint a precise picture of the costs of inaction, as a GLOBSEC study is called, and to be much more colorful and precise in the consequences that the Russian victory in Ukraine would have actually. And the very last point, ninth, what about transatlantic relations and the question of Europe alone? Well, either way, whatever happens in the next 8 months or 10 months actually till the US election, and whatever happens after that, Europeans will have to invest much more in their security, and they will have to do so, and this is an important point, not to become an independent actor on the world stage, because Europe will not very quickly, in a matter of several years, be able to defend itself completely alone. But Europe will have to invest in its defense in order to keep the United States involved in European security. And here, of course, the question of helping Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression is just the centerpiece, but not the whole story. The whole story is much wider. Okay, I have probably arbitrarily selected just a couple of points, but this was more or less what we debated. I would very much like to thank also not only our kickoff speakers, Alena, Kudzko, and Elina, Beketova, Nico Lange for being here in his spirit, actually. So thanks to all of you. And thanks to our audience for these very active participation in a matter of only a few minutes. Thank you all. I would like to close here and say, look, this is also for myself. It's not only the last debate in this series of the project Transatlantic Cooperation in Eastern European Security, but it's also my very last act as Vice President of GLOBSEC. I will remain connected to GLOBSEC as a Senior Associate Fellow, but I will finish my employment status And I'm now the founder and CEO of the Brussels Freedom Hub. And stay tuned for that. You will hear about my activities in Brussels more in the next couple of months. And I wish you all a very comfortable and enjoyable day, evening in Europe, and rest of the day in Washington. Thank you very much, and bye-bye. See you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.